Welcome in, everyone. We know you are constantly navigating this relentless flood of fast-moving, incredibly complex geopolitical developments.
Yeah, I mean, it can definitely be a lot to track on a daily basis.
It really can. And you are here because you want to cut through the noise. You want to understand the underlying mechanics of these events and grasp how they actually reshape the world around you.
Right, without getting bogged down in just superficial headlines.
Exactly. So today's mission of this deep dive is exactly that. We are analyzing a massive, sudden shockwave that is currently battering global energy markets.
Which affects basically everything.
It does. And to do this, we are diving into a recent report published by KULT Trademark, and it carries a rather stark title.
Yeah, the title is Iran Warns That War Could End Oil Production and Sales.
And before we break down the timeline and the underlying data of that report, we do need to establish a very clear baseline for you.
Always important.
Because our source material today contains politically charged events, rhetoric, and actions involving international leaders and governments, we want to be absolutely clear. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the content, but simply trying to impartially convey the ideas and facts contained in the original source material.
Right. Our objective is strictly analytical. We are just looking at the mechanics of the event as laid out in the text.
So to start us off,
What's fascinating here is how rapidly a regional targeted military action has metastasized into a tangible global operational crisis.
yeah.
We are observing an event that bypassed theoretical geopolitical posturing and almost immediately impacted the physical delivery of global energy commodities.
So let's trace the timeline, because understanding the velocity of this escalation is crucial. We are currently in the 9th day of this conflict.
Yes, 9 days.
Right. It originated on February 28th. The source material marks that specific date as the inciting incident.
Detailing the attacks by the United States and Israel.
Yeah, attacks that resulted in the death of Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, alongside several other top military commanders.
The gravity of a decapitation strike of that magnitude really cannot be overstated.
No, absolutely not.
When you remove the top tier of a nation's military and political leadership in a single coordinated action, the resulting vacuum and the immediate reactionary phase are always going to be highly volatile.
And the human toll has been massive.
It has. The KULT trademark report, citing figures from Al Jazeera, notes that more than 1,300 people have died in Iran since these hostilities began.
That is an immense human toll.
It sets a chaotic, high-stakes environment for literally everything that follows.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the conflict has now undergone a dramatic structural shift, we are no longer just looking at military-on-military engagements or leadership targeting.
The operational reality has broadened significantly.
For the first time in this current escalation, Israel attacked civilian oil facilities inside Iran.
And crossing that threshold alters the entire calculus of the conflict.
It changes the whole game.
Exactly. Up until this past Saturday night, the civilian energy infrastructure had been somewhat insulated. But the data we are analyzing from the strikes paints a very different picture now.
Yeah, Israeli warplanes bombed 4 specific oil storage depots.
Along with a petroleum product transfer center.
And these were located in the provinces of Tehran and Alborz. Now, the distinction there is really important.
How so?
Well, striking a transfer center isn't just about destroying a stockpile. It is about severing the circulatory system of the domestic economy.
That's a great way to put it.
And the visual evidence documented in the report underscores the scale. We are talking about social media videos capturing massive plumes of fire lighting up the night sky over the Iranian capital.
Terrifying visuals.
And the immediate impact on the ground wasn't limited to just the infrastructure. Karamat Vaiskrami, he's the head of Iran's National Petroleum Products Distribution Company. He confirmed on state television that at least 4 tanker truck drivers were killed in those strikes.
Which brings the operational vulnerability into sharp focus.
Right, because these are civilian logistics personnel driving tanker trucks.
Exactly. When that specific layer of the supply chain is targeted, it sends an unambiguous message about the fragility of domestic energy distribution. It forces a nation to reckon with the fact that its internal mechanisms for keeping the lights on and the trucks moving are completely exposed.
And that exposure naturally triggers a massive rhetorical escalation. We are seeing a fierce war of words happening in parallel with the physical strikes.
The rhetoric has been intense.
The report highlights the reaction from Iran's Speaker of Parliament, Mohammad Baker Kalibaf. Interestingly, he bypassed traditional diplomatic channels entirely.
No press conferences.
Right. He directed his warnings specifically at U.S. President Donald Trump, utilizing the X platform.
Statecraft via social media is a modern reality we've come to expect, but the specific framing Kolobaev uses here is highly calculated. He is attempting to exploit public messaging discrepancies.
Yeah, Kolobaev pointed out what he framed as a glaring contradiction from the U.S. president. The report translates his post, quoting, "Trump said oil prices wouldn't rise too much. Now that they have, he says they'll soon correct themselves."
There is a certain dry geopolitical irony there. Politicians promising swift market corrections while physical refineries and storage depots are actively burning.
It is a deliberate rhetorical strategy to undermine the U.S. administration's economic reassurances.
But the core threat Kolobaev delivers, right after that observation, is the crux of this entire situation.
What does he say?
He states unequivocally, if the war continues like this, there will be no way to sell oil and no capacity to produce it.
Wow.
He further claimed that what he termed Netanyahu's delusions are actively destroying the interests of the U.S., the region, and the world.
But let me push back on that for a second. We have seen Iranian officials threaten global oil supplies before.
Sure, many times.
Threatening to shut down production or block export routes is a well-worn geopolitical trope in that region. What makes analysts view Kolobaev's statement as a genuine operational disruption warning rather than just standard aggressive posturing?
It is a fair question, but the distinction lies in the physical context surrounding the rhetoric.
The context of the bombings.
Right. This isn't a threat made during a period of relative peace to leverage negotiations. This zero-sum warning, no capacity to produce it, is being issued while domestic infrastructure is actively being bombed.
And while Iran itself is engaged in intense physical retaliation.
Exactly. Since that February 28th catalyst, Iran has been launching waves of missiles and drones. They're explicitly targeting Israel, but also hitting U.S. bases in the region. The rhetoric is mirroring a rapidly expanding physical battlefield.
And that expanding battlefield brings us to the geographic nightmare at the center of this crisis.
The Strait of Hormuz.
Yes. Think about it like a major accident completely shutting down the single busiest highway in the world. For you listening, an audience already familiar with global trade routes, you know this isn't just a convenient shipping lane.
It is the central artery of global energy.
We aren't talking about a simple logistical bottleneck where ships can just reroute around the Cape of Good Hope like we see in the Red Sea.
Precisely. The logistics of the Strait of Hormuz are unforgiving. You're dealing with very large crude carriers.
VLCCs.
Right. VLCCs that have massive draft restrictions. They require specific deepwater channels to pass safely. And the volume is staggering.
Just how much oil goes through there?
The strait handles approximately 20% of the world's oil supply. That equates to roughly 20 million barrels of oil moving through that narrow maritime corridor every single day.
20 million barrels every day.
Yes.
And right now, the report indicates that traffic through that vital corridor is effectively paralyzed.
Completely frozen.
Following the warnings out of Tehran, Reuters confirmed that most tanker operators, along with the major international oil companies, have completely suspended their shipments through the strait.
And it is not limited to crude oil. The suspension includes liquefied natural gas, or LNG.
If we connect this to the bigger picture.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the macroeconomic fallout of that paralysis is instantaneous and severe.
Because markets can price in risk. They can calculate the probability of a delayed shipment.
But markets absolutely panic at physical paralysis. We are seeing crude oil prices surge above $85 a barrel.
To contextualize that for you, it is an approximate 17% increase compared to pre-war levels, realized in just 9 days.
A 17% jump in 9 days isn't just a localized headache for energy traders. That kind of velocity forces central banks to completely rethink their inflation targets.
It trickles down into everything: the cost of manufacturing, agricultural production, logistics.
But the question is this price surge purely speculative panic, or is it grounded in a permanent shift in the supply chain?
Well, the analysts at JP Morgan captured the shift perfectly. They noted that the market is shifting from assessing geopolitical risks to facing real operational disruptions.
That is the critical distinction.
Can you explain the difference for us?
Geopolitical risk means war risk insurance premiums for maritime shipping spike, making the voyage incredibly expensive. Operational disruption means the ships literally drop anchor and refuse to move, regardless of the premium.
Wow.
Exactly. When major operators suspend shipments entirely, you transition from calculating probabilities to counting lost barrels. This is why multiple analysts cited in the KULT trademark report are projecting that if this maritime blockade is prolonged, crude oil prices could easily soar past $100 a barrel.
And here's where it gets really interesting. That operational disruption isn't just confined to the waters of the Strait.
The physical attacks are spilling over borders.
We are watching a regional contagion effect unfold in real time. The source material details that Iran has actively attacked energy facilities in neighboring Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Bahrain.
This is the exact regional escalation scenario that energy markets have feared for decades. It forces massive corporate entities to take drastic legal and operational protective measures.
Like what happened with Qatar.
Take Qatar, for example. Following Iranian drone attacks, Qatar was forced to declare force majeure on its LNG exports.
For our listeners who track global supply chain contracts, you understand that declaring force majeure isn't just a minor delay notification.
Not at all.
It is the deployment of a massive legal shield. It is a sovereign exporter pulling the emergency brake, legally severing themselves from their contractual obligations to deliver gas to international buyers because the environment is fundamentally too dangerous to operate in.
And the cascading effect of that on European and Asian energy markets, which rely heavily on Qatari LNG, is immediate.
And the disruption hits Saudi Arabia equally hard. The KULT trademark report notes they had to temporarily shut down units at the Ras Tanura refinery.
Which is operated by Aramco.
Right. When you have state-operated energy titans powering down critical infrastructure because the airspace is actively contested by drones and missiles, the interconnected fragility of the region is completely exposed.
So what does this all mean for the global response?
Well, how are global leaders attempting to contain an operational crisis of this magnitude? We have a massive global supply shock running parallel to an escalating military conflict.
The KULT trademark report details the U.S. response, providing a timeline from U.S. President Donald Trump.
What's the projection?
He has publicly estimated that this war could last between 4 and 5 weeks.
4 and 5 weeks. Analyzing that timeline through an economic lens is sobering. If we are currently on day 9, we are roughly a quarter of the way through his projected duration.
Right. And if global crude prices jump 17% in the first week alone, a 4 to 5 week timeline implies a sustained, punishing period of extreme market volatility and supply constriction.
Which explains the urgency behind the U.S. mitigation strategy.
They have to act fast.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced a coordinated plan, led jointly by the Secretaries of Energy and the Treasury. Their explicit mandate is to mitigate the severe impact on oil prices.
The dual-agency approach is telling. It requires both departments because they are fighting a two-front economic war.
The physical and the financial?
Yes. The Department of Energy has to address the physical supply shortages and strategic reserves, while the Treasury has to manage the massive macroeconomic shock, liquidity issues, and inflationary pressure that a $100 barrel of oil creates.
Rubio's public assessment of the vulnerability did not sugarcoat the reality.
Not even a little.
He stated, "This terrorist regime led by radical clerics has the potential to shut down 20% of global energy."
He intentionally loops right back to that 20% metric.
It is the inescapable gravity of the Strait of Hormuz.
It really is.
For you listening, this deep dive highlights exactly why a regional conflict 7,000 miles away lands directly on your doorstep. A 20% disruption in global energy isn't just a headline. It is a fundamental alteration of the global economy.
It's the unseen tax on everything.
From the logistics networks that stock your local grocery store, to the plastics required for medical manufacturing, to the baseline operational costs of every major corporation on Earth.
This raises an important question about the fundamental architecture of the modern global economy. Over the last 50 years, we have built a highly optimized, incredibly interconnected, just-in-time global supply chain.
Super efficient, but very delicate.
Exactly. But an event like this, a localized conflict, barely over a week old, demonstrates how swiftly extreme optimization becomes a catastrophic liability. The resilience of the entire global market is currently dependent on the physical security of a 21-mile-wide maritime choke point.
It is a staggering vulnerability to accept as the cost of doing business.
It is. And when that bottleneck is paralyzed, the illusion of a stable global market shatters.
That leaves us with a critical, lingering thought to explore as we wrap up today's deep dive. If a conflict that is only 9 days old can force international energy giants to invoke force majeure, force state-run refineries to power down, and completely paralyze the world's most vital energy artery.
Just how inherently fragile is this system?
Exactly. How inherently fragile is a global economic system that remains so stubbornly tethered to a single, highly volatile geographic region? Could a crisis of this magnitude, one that exposes such immediate, devastating vulnerability, be the catalyst that permanently accelerates the global transition away from fossil fuels?
Not necessarily for environmental reasons.
Right, not as an environmental initiative, but purely as a matter of inescapable, hard-nosed national security. Because as this report makes abundantly clear, when the oil stops flowing through the strait, the world simply stops moving.
It gives you a lot to think about.
It definitely does. Thank you for joining us to unpack this complex issue today. Keep questioning the narratives, keep exploring the mechanics behind the headlines, and we will catch you next time.